They didn't hear him break in. They didn't hear him move through the room. And most terrifying of all, many of his victims never realized someone was there until it was already too late. In the quiet hours of the night, while Los Angeles slept behind locked doors and drawn curtains, a presence was moving through the city, barefoot, silent, watching. Tonight, you're about to step into the true story of Richard Ramirez, a name that still echoes through California like a warning whispered after dark. And before we go any further, if you're drawn to stories that uncover the darkest corners of real history, stories that don't rush and don't look away, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These long-form investigations take time, and subscribing ensures you don't miss what comes next. Now ask yourself this question as we begin. How does a city fail to see a monster hiding in plain sight? Los Angeles in the early 1980s was a city of contrasts: sunlit beaches, Hollywood dreams, endless highways, and beneath it all, a growing sense of unease. Crime was rising, neighborhoods were changing, and fear had a way of spreading faster than facts. But no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. At first, the incident seemed disconnected: a break-in here, a murder there, different neighborhoods, different victims, no obvious pattern. Police departments rely on patterns to make sense of chaos, and in this case, chaos was all they had. The city was being hunted, but it didn't yet know it was prey. Richard Ramirez did not fit the public's idea of a serial killer. He had no fixed hunting ground, no single victim profile, no predictable routine. That unpredictability would become one of his most dangerous weapons. He attacked men and women, young and old, rich neighborhoods and struggling ones, houses, apartments, places people believed were safe simply because they were familiar. And every time investigators thought they understood what they were dealing with, the rules changed again. This wasn't just a crime wave, it was psychological warfare against an entire city. What made it worse was the silence. Ramirez didn't announce himself. He didn't stalk visibly. He didn't leave warnings. He moved at night, often entering homes through unlocked doors or windows, exploiting one simple human habit: comfort. Many people believed danger lived somewhere else, with other people, in other neighborhoods. Ramirez thrived on that belief. Each successful attack reinforced the illusion that the previous one had been an isolated incident, and the longer that illusion held, the longer he remained invisible. As weeks passed, fear began to creep into everyday life. People slept with lights on, gun sales increased, windows were nailed shut, neighborhood watch groups formed almost overnight. But fear without clarity is a blunt instrument. Everyone was alert, yet no one knew what to look for. Witness descriptions conflicted. One survivor described a man with bad teeth. Another mentioned a heavy accent. Some said he was tall, others short. The image of the killer fractured into pieces that refused to align. And somewhere in the city, Richard Ramirez was watching the panic he created, feeding off it, adapting to it. To understand how this happened, you have to look backwards, long before the headlines and the manhunts, to the beginning of Richard Ramirez himself. He was born into instability, surrounded by violence, neglect, and stories that blurred the line between reality and horror. His childhood was not a single traumatic event, but a slow accumulation of darkness. Exposure to graphic stories, substance abuse, head injuries, and an environment where fear and aggression were normalized created a foundation that would later collapse in catastrophic ways. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people grow up in chaos and never become monsters. So what made Ramirez different?
That question haunted investigators as much as the murders themselves. Ramirez wasn't just violent, he was theatrical in his cruelty. He wanted his presence felt. He wanted fear to linger long after he left. He spoke to victims, invaded their sense of control, and then vanished back into the night. This wasn't random violence born of rage. It was calculated, ritualistic, and deeply personal. Each crime scene carried the same unsettling message. Someone had been here, and they could return at any time. As the attacks escalated, the media stepped in, and with it came a name that would define an era of terror: the Night Stalker. Headlines screamed it, television anchors repeated it. The name spread faster than any police bulletin ever could, and while it galvanized public attention, it also complicated the hunt. The killer became a myth, larger than life, and myths have a way of distorting reality. People began seeing the Night Stalker everywhere. Innocent men were reported, followed, even attacked. Fear no longer needed evidence. Suspicion was enough. Behind closed doors, law enforcement was under immense pressure. Multiple jurisdictions struggled to share information efficiently. Evidence piled up faster than it could be processed. Leads went cold, and each failure carried a cost measured in lives. Ramirez exploited every weakness. He traveled across county lines. He altered his appearance. He changed weapons. Each move was deliberate, designed to stay one step ahead of a system not built for a predator this fluid. And while the public demanded answers, the truth was far more unsettling. The city was losing control. One of the most chilling aspects of this case is how ordinary many of the moments were before they turned deadly. Victims went to bed thinking about work, family, plans for the next day. There were no warning signs, no final realizations that danger was near. That sudden transition from normalcy to terror is what made the Night Stalker different. He didn't just kill people, he shattered the illusion of safety itself. After Ramirez, locking your door at night was no longer a routine habit, it was a survival strategy. And still, he remained free. Each night he walked through neighborhoods that would later appear on the news, passing homes filled with people who had no idea how close he was. This is the part of the story that forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes evil doesn't look extraordinary. Sometimes it looks like a man walking down the street, unnoticed, blending into the background of a city too large to see everything happening within it. As the case grew colder by the day, investigators faced a grim possibility. What if they never caught him? What if this pattern of fear became permanent? Cities are built on trust. Trust that the structures around us work, that someone is watching out for us, the danger can be contained. Richard Ramirez was dismantling that trust piece by piece, and in doing so, he was exposing the fragile line between order and chaos. This is where the story turns darker, because the Night Stalker was not just a killer hiding from the public, he was hiding in the cracks of the system itself. Missed connections, delayed reports, jurisdictional rivalries. Each flaw became a shield, and every night he remained free, reinforced the idea that some threats cannot be stopped once they've learned how to move unseen. So as this first chapter closes, hold on to this thought. Richard Ramirez did not succeed because he was invisible. He succeeded because he understood something deeply human. People want to believe tomorrow will be normal. That belief, that hope, is what allowed him to keep moving, to keep watching, to keep waiting. In the next part of this story, we'll follow the trail as it tightens, as mistakes are made on both sides, and as the city edges closer to a breaking point. Because when fear reaches a certain level, it doesn't just change how people sleep, it changes how they act. And soon, Los Angeles would learn just how dangerous that transformation could be. By the time the city realized the attacks were connected, The damage had already spread far beyond the crime scenes. Fear had become a shared experience, something felt even by people who had never seen a police report or watched the evening news. It lived in quiet moments, in the pause before turning off the lights, in the sound of footsteps outside a bedroom window. Richard Ramirez had done more than evade capture. He had forced millions of people to imagine him, and imagination, when fed by uncertainty, is often worse than reality. The pressure on law enforcement intensified with every new incident. Detectives worked long hours, sleeping in shifts, pinning maps to walls, and drawing lines that led nowhere. Crime scenes were studied again and again, searching for consistency where chaos seemed to rule. Finally, patterns began to emerge, not in who the victims were, but in how the killer moved. Ramirez favored late-night hours, often entering homes through unlocked doors or windows, sometimes testing several houses before choosing one. It wasn't speed that guided him, it was patience. He waited for silence, he waited for vulnerability. Survivors described something deeply unsettling. Ramirez didn't behave like someone rushing to escape. He lingered, he spoke, he asserted control. These details mattered because they revealed motivation. This wasn't purely about violence, it was about dominance. Investigators began to understand that the Night Stalker wasn't just trying to avoid being caught, he wanted to be remembered. He wanted his presence to leave a mark long after he was gone. That realization shifted the focus of the investigation, but it came with a chilling consequence. The killer was likely escalating. As media coverage exploded, Ramirez became a figure of obsession. His crimes were discussed at dinner tables, debated on talk shows, whispered about in school hallways. Sketches were released, then revised again. Each new image created more confusion. People saw his face everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and with every false lead, trust in the system eroded further. The public didn't just want an arrest, they wanted reassurance that the nightmare could end. Inside police departments, tension boiled. Jurisdictional boundaries complicated coordination. Evidence was scattered across counties, handled by different teams, stored in different systems. In a case this fluid, delays were deadly. Ramirez continued moving freely, adjusting his routes, avoiding areas with heavy police presence, sometimes disappearing for days before resurfacing miles away. It was as if he could sense when the net was tightening and slip through just before it closed. Then came a critical turning point: forensic evidence. A single detail, overlooked at first, began to connect scenes in a way nothing else had. Shoe prints. Not just any shoe prints, but a rare brand and size, appearing again and again at different locations. For the first time, investigators had something concrete, something that didn't change with witness memory or fear. It was a silent signature, pressed into dirt and carpet, tying the crimes together with brutal consistency. This discovery didn't solve the case, but it gave it direction. The Night Stalker was no longer an abstract threat. He was a man with a physical presence, a weight, a pattern of movement. The city wasn't safe yet, but the fog was beginning to thin. And with that clarity came urgency, because Ramirez was still out there, and every night without an arrest was another roll of the dice. Meanwhile, Ramirez himself was unraveling. His lifestyle grew increasingly chaotic. He drifted between cheap motels, friends' couches, and abandoned spaces. He relied on substance use, feeding a cycle of paranoia and impulsivity. The more attention the case received, the more reckless his behavior became. This is a crucial detail often overlooked. Serial offenders don't remain perfectly controlled forever. Pressure fractures routines, confidence turns into carelessness, and in those cracks, capture becomes possible. Witnesses began reporting sightings that felt more grounded, less speculative. A man lingering too long, someone matching the description, behaving strangely, vanishing when approached. Each report added weight to a growing sense that the Night Stalker was slipping. But even now, the danger hadn't passed. If anything, it was peaking. Ramirez's crimes grew bolder, his movements less cautious. He was no longer just evading law enforcement, he was daring them to stop him. The city responded in unexpected ways. Neighborhoods organized patrols, people armed themselves, suspicion replaced trust. Strangers were watched, followed, sometimes confronted. In some cases, innocent people were caught in the backlash of fear. This was the hidden cost of terror. When fear spreads unchecked, it doesn't just isolate the guilty, it fractures communities. Ramirez may not have planned this outcome, but he benefited from it. Chaos creates cover. One of the most haunting elements of this phase of the story is how close Ramirez came to being caught, again and again, without realizing it. He crossed paths with police unknowingly. He moved through areas under surveillance. He existed within inches of exposure, yet remained free. To investigators, it felt like chasing a shadow that kept just enough distance to stay intact. To the public, it felt like living inside a nightmare with no ending. Then, slowly, momentum shifted. A breakthrough didn't come from brilliance or technology alone, but from accumulation. Small details layered over time, a partial description here, a location there, the shoe print evidence tightening the field. The picture wasn't clear yet, but it was narrowing. And for the first time since the killings began, there was a sense that the Night Stalker could be human, not myth. This is where the psychology of the case deepens. Ramirez wasn't hiding because he was invisible. He was hiding because systems weren't built to adapt quickly. But systems learn, they adjust, and once that adjustment begins, predators lose their advantage. Ramirez didn't know it yet, but his freedom was becoming fragile. Each step he took carried more risk than the last. As fear reached its peak, so did public involvement. Tips flooded in. Not all were useful, but among the noise were fragments of truth. A face remembered, a voice recognized, a name whispered cautiously. The Night Stalker was no longer just a threat in the dark, he was becoming a suspect in daylight. And daylight is where monsters struggle to survive. This block of the story ends on a knife's edge. Richard Ramirez is still free, still dangerous, but the walls are closing in. The city has changed, people have changed, law enforcement has changed, and in the next chapter, everything accelerates. Mistakes will be made, lines will be crossed, and the man who once moved unseen through the night will discover what happens when fear turns into fury and a hunted city decides it has had enough.
By the time Richard Ramirez was finally captured, Los Angeles was no longer the same city that had unknowingly allowed him to move through its streets. Fear had reshaped behavior. Locks had replaced trust. Silence had replaced routine. And even as the man responsible was now in custody, the question that haunted the city was not relief, but damage. What does a city lose when it learns that evil can walk through its neighborhoods unnoticed for months? Ramirez's arrest did not arrive with dignity or order. It came with chaos. Recognized by ordinary citizens, chased through the streets, beaten before police could even intervene, his capture felt less like justice and more like an eruption, a release of collective terror finally finding a target. For months, the Night Stalker had been invisible, a shadow slipping through unlocked doors and open windows. Now he was exposed, human, fragile, and surrounded by the very people he had terrorized. But capture did not bring answers, it brought silence where explanations should have been. Inside interrogation rooms, Ramirez showed no urgency to clarify anything. His statements were fragmented, evasive, sometimes theatrical. He alternated between defiance and indifference, as if the gravity of his crimes belonged to someone else. Investigators quickly realized that understanding him would be far more difficult than catching him. He did not offer remorse, he did not offer clarity, he offered presence, and that alone unsettled everyone in the room. As evidence accumulated, the full scope of his crimes became undeniable. Scenes once thought unrelated were now connected. Timelines overlapped. Patterns emerged that had been invisible in isolation. The realization was devastating. The system had been chasing fragments while the whole moved freely. Ramirez had exploited jurisdictional gaps, delayed communication, and a city unprepared for a predator who didn't follow rules. The trial that followed became one of the most infamous in American history. Media coverage was relentless. Cameras captured every expression, every stare, every moment of silence. Ramirez understood the power of attention and leaned into it. He stared back at the cameras, sometimes smiling, sometimes expressionless, always aware. For many watching, it felt like a second violation, as if the pain of victims was being overshadowed by the spectacle of the man who caused it. Yet inside the courtroom, the truth cut through any illusion. Survivors spoke, families testified. The weight of their words stripped away mythology and replaced it with consequence. These were not stories, these were lives permanently altered. The contrast between the media image and the human cost created an unbearable tension, one that forced the public to confront its own fascination with monsters. Psychological experts attempted explanations: trauma, substance abuse, ideology, control. But no theory softened the reality. Explanations did not restore lives. Labels did not undo damage. Ramirez was not a puzzle to be solved. He was a reminder of what happens when warning signs are scattered and response comes too late. When sentencing arrived, it did not feel like an ending. It felt procedural, necessary but incomplete. Justice was delivered, but closure remained elusive. Because no sentence can return stolen peace, no verdict can erase memory, and no prison wall can fully contain the impact of what had already spread.
In the years that followed, the Night Stalker case took on a second life, retold, reanalyzed, dramatized. Documentaries, books, series, each promised insight, yet often blurred the line between education and obsession. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Why do stories like this continue to draw us in? Perhaps because they force us to confront vulnerability, perhaps because they expose the illusion of safety, or perhaps because they remind us that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in, sometimes it waits, sometimes it relies on our assumptions. Richard Ramirez did not just terrorize a city, he revealed its fractures. He exposed how fear spreads faster than information, how systems struggle under pressure, and how communities only truly mobilize when terror becomes undeniable. His story is not important because of who he was, but because of what went unnoticed until it was too late. And that is where this story truly ends, not with the man, but with the silence he left behind. A silence filled with questions, warnings, and lessons that still matter today. If stories like this unsettle you, if they force you to think deeper about crime, fear, and human behavior, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to Open Case Files to continue exploring the cases that refuse to stay buried, because understanding the darkness is the first step to recognizing it when it appears again. Some stories end in courtrooms, others linger far longer.